Welcome to the Inquiry 2.0. Today we've got a fascinating upload on an event from 1976 where a family from Newcastle were attacked in a pub by a group of hard men enforcers, call them what you will. And this family defended themselves, and one man ended up dead and the other injured in a bloody battle, which ended up with Stephen Abadom going to court but being cleared of murder. This was mentioned on a live by Paddy Conroy the other night, which I'm glad I watched to the end because he mentioned this event that happened, and I decided to do some research, and I went through newspaper archives of 1976 in Newcastle, and I've come up with a perler of an article which covered the whole thing in the media. So I'm going to read this to you guys and give my comments after. Bear with me because I have to zoom in on this to get all the details. Stephen Abadom left the dock at Newcastle Crown Court today a free man. He was acquitted of the murder of John James Noble at the Playground Disco pub on June 20th and cleared of attempting to murder Stuart Appleby or wounding him with intent to do him grievous harm. After legal discussions in the absence of the jury, Mr. Justice Davis told them, "I have come to the conclusion, and it is my responsibility at this stage, and I hope you will agree with me, that on the evidence we have heard, it would be quite unsafe to say that the prosecution have proved that this defendant did not act in self-defence." The judge told the jury that they knew by now that a number of men, including Stuart Appleby, were charged with offences relating to this particular night when the terrible events occurred at the Playground Disco. The men had been charged with conspiracy to assault the Abadom brothers and making an affray. These men had already been tried by another judge and another jury, and he and the jury were not concerned with the result of that trial or how you came about that. They were tried before Abadom and not with him or whatever. The prosecution took the view that this team of men went to the playground to assault the Abadoms. Mr. Peter Baker QC, leading for the Crown, had made it clear that if John Noble had not met his death, he would have been included in those charges. The general picture that has emerged from the trial taking place this week, and the prosecution accept this, seems to be that this team of men did go to the club intending to damage the Abadoms. The general picture from the independent witnesses seems to be that they surrounded these men, and at least one of the intruders who forced their way into the club without paying had a knife, and probably more than one. Of course, this defendant would not have been carrying a knife, should not have been carrying a knife, and he would have had no answer to the charge of unlawfully possessing an offensive weapon. But he is not charged with that, said the judge. He had a knife. Now he is attacked by this gang of men. He and his brother are outnumbered by about 10 to 1, and he draws this knife. The general picture emerging from the evidence, in my view, is that he was no doubt using considerable force and swinging that knife and stabbing it out a good deal on the prosecution evidence defending himself from that attack. The prosecution very fairly said at the start that they had to prove that Abadom did not act in self-defence, and that applied to all the charges, he said. If a man is acting in reasonable self-defence, then he cannot be guilty of any of these charges, said the judge. He said he hoped the jury would agree with the view he had formed that the general picture is that if Abadom hadn't done what he did, he or his brother might have sustained very serious and perhaps fatal injuries. We just don't know. This is a matter of speculation. I am the last person, I hope, to forget the position in any criminal case of the victim, and the fact is that nothing can bring Mr. Noble back to life. Fortunately, the other man, Stuart Appleby, seems to have made a complete recovery. I have come to the conclusion that without the case going any further, it really would be quite unsafe and unsatisfactory to invite you to say he did not act in self-defence, he told the jury. The judge paid tribute to the press in Newcastle. I must say that in various visits to Newcastle that I have been impressed by the high standard of reporting in this city compared to some other places where they don't even get the name of the case right, let alone the judge or the defendant, he added. He hoped it would be made clear that in his view on the evidence that the verdict to be returned is a fair one. It does not mean that the court takes the view that the events of that evening in the Playground Club were not indeed a night of terror, a disgraceful, horrible situation, he said. People should be able to go for a pleasant evening's enjoyment without a fight breaking out, knives being flashed, one man dying and another man getting wounded. I am sure the police will do everything they can to get that sort of matter under control, he concluded. Then he discharged Abadom from the court. Earlier, the court had been told of a statement Abadom made to the police. Detective Chief Inspector James Anderson told the court that with Detective Sergeant, now Inspector Meldrum, he interviewed Abadom at Newcastle Police Station, and in answer to a question that he was responsible for the death of Noble, Abadom replied, "You are 100% correct." Abadom said a big guy went first for his brother, Snowy, Nigel, that would be, and the next thing he knew, the man was going for him and he felt as if he had been stabbed. He said he had only one knife. In a statement, Abadom said that since March there had been trouble brewing between his brothers and their friends with men called Harry Perry, Paddy Leonard, Dennis Stoko, Robinson, and a few of their friends. He also knew that Barry and Richard Ford went with that team, but until that night he had no problem with them. As a result of the trouble, he had moved to South Shields and kept out of Newcastle. The Tuesday before the disco incident, he and his brother Nigel were in the Shoreline Club in South Shields when Harry Perry and Keith Bell arrived with a heavy team of about 15 men. Abadom said he expected some sort of trouble, but Nigel was quite friendly with Perry in the past, and they went over to try to talk to these guys as they didn't want any trouble. No bad words were spoken, and Harry Perry seemed okay and quite pleased to see our kid. The talk was on the tunes. The talk was of the tune of letting bygones be bygones, he said. Because of this, on the Friday night, he and Nigel went to the playground disco in Newcastle. They had not been in there for over a year. Abadom said his girlfriend, Ann Thompson, was with him. After about half an hour, he noticed a big crowd of around 20 men coming in and recognised Dickie Ford at the front of them. They came right up to him and his brother and included Dennis Stoko, Paddy Leonard, and a few others he knew by sight, only as knocking about with that team. People started moving back as it was obvious there was going to be trouble. They formed a half circle about them, and Dickie Ford spoke first to Nigel, saying, "Who's been a naughty boy now?" Dennis Stoko said something like, "Come and take it." Abadom went on in a statement that a tall guy in a check jacket said something, but he couldn't make out what it was, and Dennis Stoko said to him, "You be have, sonny boy." The tall fellow who had spoken and had been standing between him and Nigel made a move towards Nigel, who ducked and moved back. I felt a pain in my left shoulder then, and I saw a hand being pulled away and a knife blade flash in front of my face. I didn't see who it was, but it was one of the crowd around us, he said. The person with the knife came at him again, but he couldn't really see who he was because he was watching the knife. He stepped back to get out of the way, and as he did, the man swung at him with a knife and stabbed him in the left arm. Just to interject, guys, bear with me here because this is very faint from this news article, but I am going to get through this because it's quite interesting. Abadom said he tried to get his knife out of his pocket, but could not do so because he was being rushed. He slipped and fell, and glasses were smashing around him. By this time, he had arrived at the bottom entrance of the bar counter, where he managed to get hold of his knife. There were 3 men trying to get at him, and the others were leaning over the counter throwing glasses. He grabbed the man in front of him who had been attacking him. He had his knife in his hand and started lashing out at him. They backed off after this, and Abadom said he saw Nigel on the floor being kicked by a large crowd of the same men. He lashed out at the nearest one with his knife, and they scattered. He turned round, and they were all backing off by this time. He looked behind him to see if anyone else was coming to attack him. When he looked for Nigel again, he had gone. He had to shelter behind a pillar because they were raining glasses at him. One hit him on the chest. In the statement, he told how he managed to get away through a back exit. His left arm and hand was saturated with blood. He ran into a back lane, ran away and put the knife down the drain in a back alley of Westgate Road. He hid for a while because he thought the guys were still chasing him, and in about 2 hours walked to the house of Mrs. Ekong in Hawthorne Terrace, but she would not let him in. He walked up the stairs and saw a man he knew and asked him if he could see to his arm. He got this man to telephone John McLaughlin and got him to take him in a van to South Shields. He then phoned a man called Abdullah and went to his house. His sister fixed his arm and asked him to go to the hospital and go to the police and tell them the whole story. Just 1 second, guys. I'm scrolling around this statement. He didn't know anyone had died. Nigel was at the house and they stayed there overnight. Police came the next morning, and what they were talking when they were talking at the front door, he and his brother ran out the back. It's very hard to see this text, but I'm going to try and get through this. I realised he must have hit someone with a knife, he said in the statement. They went to Chester Street and in the afternoon bought a new paper and saw a picture of the dead man. They thought about going back and seeing the police, but went to Stockton to see some friends and stayed overnight, deciding to get in touch with a solicitor. 1 second, guys. The reason why I was carrying the knife was because I didn't really believe that the trouble was over, and the knife was to frighten them off. I saw the photograph of the dead man in the paper and realised this was the man I had lashed out at, he said. Previously, the court had been told by Dr. Jack Ennis, pathologist, that Noble's death was due to hemorrhaging after a stab wound in the top of the chest. Noble had received 4 wounds, 2 of them in the front of the left side of the chest, the one causing death by having punctured the lungs. The other wounds were on the upper right side of the thigh and below and just behind the right shoulder. The wounds were of random distribution and direction, such as one would expect in the deceased. Detective Chief Inspector Anderson admitted in cross-examination that the playground disco had a dreadful reputation for violence. Mr. Platt Mills then referred to the activities of this group of men. He dubbed them the 21 and asked the Chief Inspector if the group thought they had some cause for grievance against the Abadoms. The Chief Inspector admitted that this was so, and he spoke of the group and men as pursuing the Abadoms to South Shields, where they had moved from Newcastle to start a fresh life. Moreover, it appeared that they had pursued the Abadoms' girlfriends and men's friends. Detective Chief Inspector Anderson agreed that on the night of the incident, the Abadoms were plainly outnumbered 10-1. In further cross-examination, he spoke of other men being charged with conspiracy to assault the Abadoms and said that a number of people who had been charged had been acquitted at previous trial at Crown Court. He said the prosecution witnesses of the disco incident failed to live up to the original stories they told the police. Okay, guys, so that is the actual article from the Evening Chronicle, Thursday, January 29th, 1976. I'm going to leave a link, if I'm able to, in the description of this PDF, which people can then download if they wish. So, now, my thoughts on this are, this Stephen Abadom, who sadly passed, I believe, was clearly defending himself. I don't know the background to the beef. Paddy Conway said that Dave Glover was there as well, amongst others, with this firm, and they'd been asked to deal with the Abadoms and get them out of Newcastle. I don't know whether this was due to racism or it was due to them getting up to mischief, being bad boys, or whatever, and they wanted them out. And this was clearly ongoing. But where the prosecution messed up, and this is what the judge stated, and it's similar to a case, it's not similar to the case, but the actual outcome of Jerry the Monk Hutch, where the prosecution have gone all out for murder. They haven't even put in any subcharges of manslaughter or offensive weapons or anything like that. It was literally murder. And because the judge said it was clear that there was a case for self-defense, that he directed the jury to dismiss the charges. So they just messed up there, the prosecution. Could have gotten him on something of a smaller charge. Same with the Jerry Hutch trial. They went for murder, just murder. They didn't go for conspiracy or anything like that, which they probably would have got a result on. So it's just inept prosecutions. But it was a good result, obviously, for Stephen Abadom. Like I say, guys, I don't know the details of the Abadoms. I know that they've been in jail and, members of the families had been in jail, etc., for different things over the years and became quite prominent in the Newcastle area. But I thought this was really interesting and quite an in-depth, detailed article. Usually these articles are quite small, so this was a big piece by Marion Murray and Frank Roebuck. Okay, if you enjoyed that, guys, smash the likes out, hit the subscribe. Also, in the description, there's a Linktree link with all our TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, where we have different types of content coming out. So feel free to come and join those channels as well. Take care.